YouTube, thank you for coming. I recently took a bunch of questions from my audience, and today I'm going to be answering them for you. We're going to be doing several videos on several different topics, but this one we are going to be answering comics-specific questions, like questions about making comics and all the little ins and outs of comic-related stuff. A topic that I feel very qualified to talk about because I've been making comics and webcomics specifically for over 15 years at this point. That's so many. That's like pretty much half my life at this point. But yeah, so we are gonna be going through and answering questions from my lovely viewers. So I say let's go ahead and get right into it. How do you figure out where to put speech bubbles? This would be for like a comic or something. Honestly, I talk about this in my video on my comic making process. It starts with like thumbnails and sketching and all that stuff. One thing that really helps is that I plan out where my speech bubbles are going to go as early in the process as humanly possible. So I figure out where my lettering goes as far back as thumbnails. So I'll do like rough little like stick figure thumbnails to figure out where all my characters are gonna go and what the page is gonna look like. And that's when I figure out where I'm going to put my speech bubbles. As far as like compositionally, it really is just a matter of making sure you leave room for your speech bubbles, making sure that it looks good within the composition. And that's just, you know, like your standard art skills of like, where does this thing go? Where does this thing go? I think in general, some good rules of thumb are I try not to have my speech bubbles overlapping my characters at all. I try to give them each their own space. You don't want them all up in each other's face. Make sure that they are like flowing properly. I have some diagrams for this in my How to Webcomic book. But yeah, I think it's just in general like how you would plan composition for just about any like type of illustration. I think the best advice I can give anyone for planning out where their speech bubbles are going to go is do it as early as possible and make it part of your panel composition. Don't just plan out what your characters and background are going to look like in a panel. You should also include your speech bubbles in there and then make everything else flow along with your speech bubbles. Don't make your speech bubbles and your art fight each other. They must be friends and they must be given their own space. And the best way to do that is to plan them out early. More information on that in my How to Webcomic book. I have a whole section for it. Let's move right along to the next one. How do you make your comic character distinct from the backgrounds without them looking out of place? So if you want some more examples about this one, I highly recommend looking at the background art for animated shows. Without the characters, just look at the backgrounds. They can make the colors of the backgrounds a little bit lighter. They kind of have like a spotlight effect. The Steven Universe backgrounds are a great example of this. Also, compositionally, they'll usually have a lot of things. My favorite thing to do is a little bit of a sneaky, stupid hack that I like to do. So this is a page from earlier on in this chapter of Cast Off. I like to think that I'm sneaky and that no one notices that I do this until I point it out. You'll see how the characters kind of glow a little bit. I do that on purpose. It helps the characters kind of stand out from the background just a little bit more. I like to think it's subtle. Guys, I do this on every single page. I did it again here. It's not something you would notice unless you're specifically looking for it. But especially in like this middle row, you can kind of see just a little bit of glow, little bit of like a lighter color behind the character specifically. And I just do this because I feel like it makes them pop. You can also see it in this establishing shot in the very, very top. It just gets a little bit lighter around the characters. And I feel like you make it subtle enough and people aren't gonna notice it, but it does genuinely help them kind of stick out from the rest of the background. I do this shit in every single page. Sneaky little art tricks, but it does help. Another thing is to just, you know, like not put anything too super busy behind the characters. You can also do like different values, like make the character much lighter than the background or the background much lighter than the character. It's gonna depend on like the lighting of the scene as well. There's a couple different ways I like my glowies. I like making the background just like a little bit lighter behind the character to kind of make them pop out. Also, if this is something you want to look more into, if this is something you want to study more, genuinely do go look at like isolated background art for animated TV shows. Steven Universe has great backgrounds. That's a good starting place for you. Look at it with and without the characters and just kind of see how did they like spotlight this specifically. How did you find the motivation to create comics, and how did you figure out the style you wanted to draw in? So I'm gonna treat these like two separate questions because they are, but they were submitted as the same question, so I put them both on the same card. So for the first part, how did you find the motivation to create comics? Again, I think it's less about finding the motivation and more just, you gotta be a little bit crazy and you just gotta really, really, really wanna make this thing. You have to be so inspired and so in love with the ideas that you have that you just really wanna do it so badly. For me, the motivation just came out of, I like this thing. I want to do this thing. I see other people doing this thing. I want to do this thing. I've talked about this in the past. My first attempts at comics ever. I read a lot of manga. I read a lot of like 4-panel manga. Like Azumanga Daioh was like my very first manga. And I loved the 4-panel format. I thought it was really funny. I also read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes in middle school. And so my very first attempts at making comics were little like 4-panel comics based on just silly shenaniganery that my friends got up to. And then, you know, throughout middle and high school, I read a lot of manga. I got into a lot of different stories. I swear to God, I read every single manga in my library. In my school's library, I chomped through those suckers and I was like, comics are so cool. I want to do this forever. The motivation came from just seeing a bunch of other people making cool comics and being like, I want to do that. And so it's less about where did you find the motivation? The motivation is the inspiration. Right? It's like I was inspired because I saw other people doing this and I wanted to do it too. The motivation came from, let me actually just sit down and do it. And I think part of the motivation is like getting over the fear, perhaps. I think what happens for some people is less a lack of motivation and more a presence of fear. They're like, I am worried that this is not going to be good. I'm worried that this isn't going to be the fantastic work I want it to be. And let me go ahead and shatter that for you. It's not gonna be. You are going to have big dreams and aspirations, and then maybe the work that you come up with, like your very first attempts at a new medium, doesn't necessarily meet your expectations. Get used to that feeling, because it never goes away. Just acknowledge it as part of the process. You have to get over that fear, because it's never going to go away. And so if that is the thing that is holding you back, just make something bad. Your first attempts at making something are probably gonna be bad. Like your very first time putting pen to paper, it's not gonna look good. It's all about practice and determination. Get used to disappointment, exactly. I will finish a comic page and be like, wow, this does not look the way I hoped it would. Post. Cause that's just the reality, you know, doing comics, not every page is gonna be your fantastic magnum opus. Not every page is gonna be great. As long as it's doing what it needs to do, that's all it needs to do. You know, I always tell people when you're making a comic, give it a solid like 75% of your effort. Going whole ass into every single comic page is a fast way for burnout as well. Sometimes done is better than perfect. Done is always better than perfect, my friend, because you will not reach perfection. It is a silly thing to strive for because perfection cannot exist in a subjective medium. Persistence beats inspiration. Yes, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. When I was growing up, I was in a friend group with several different artists. Not every friend in my friend group was an artist, but of the ones that considered themselves artists, I was one of them. And of the artists in my friend group, on a technical level, I was the worst. I was the worst artist in my friend group, just on a purely technical level. And I'm not saying that to be fishing for compliments. I'm saying it because it's true. I've always been a little bit of a slow learner, and it's something that I've struggled with my entire life. That could have made me feel bad, and there were definitely days when it did. But the thing is, of those people, for example, like 5 people in my friend group that were artists, and of those 5 people, I am the only one with an art career, because I am the only one who kept doing it, even though I was the worst, technically, artist. At the end of the day, it's not about how much skill you have right away, it's how much you stick with it. And I feel like waiting for motivation, waiting for the inspiration fairy to come to you, like, what are you waiting for? Just do it. If you're worried about doing it bad, then just do it bad. You know, just do it bad and get it out of your system, because just do it. Just do it. Do it bad. Do it scared. Because at least you're doing it, right? I'll tell you another thing. All of my friends who were all talking about, it's like, man, I want to make this a webcomic. Man, I want to write this a story. They never did it. None of them ever did it. I did. And now I'm here, talking to you guys and telling you to just do it. Do it bad. Do it scared. Do it no matter how you feel about it. Just do it and post it. What's that anecdote about 1,000 shitty bicycles? Yeah, this is the perfect time for the 1,000 shitty bicycles. When I was in college, a professor of mine said that every person has 1,000 bad drawings inside them. And if you want to get down to the good drawings, you have to get those 1,000 shitty drawings out of your system first. He was like, if you have 100 shitty drawings of bicycles in your body right now, they're stored in your body. And if you want to get to the good bicycles, you have to draw 100 shitty bicycles first. You have to get the shitty bicycles out of your body, and then you can start drawing the good bicycles. And what that's actually trying to say is that if you draw a shitty bicycle, your second bicycle will probably also be shitty, and so will your third and your fourth and your fifth. But you know, as you go and you, I cast 1,000 shitty bicycles, yeah. But it's like, especially if you're like looking at your references and you're like, okay, this bicycle is shitty because of this reason. Your 10th bicycle drawing will probably be better than your first bicycle drawing, right? You learn and you practice and you get better and you get those shitty bicycle drawings out of your system. And then once you've drawn 1,000 bicycles, you'll probably be pretty good at drawing bicycles. It is the same with literally anything. Also, you know, you should be like looking at references and stuff. That's also important. Don't just draw bicycles from memory. You have to actually like look at the thing to know how it's put together. I remember there was another class with a different professor in my college that was like, you want to learn how to draw the human body? Draw it 1,000 times in like different poses. And that's what I did. And they had a challenge. It's like, we're going to see who can draw the most human figures, like gesture drawings, before the end of the semester. I think she actually said it was like 200 gesture drawings. And now if you challenge me to do that now, I could bust that out in a week. But that was like, you'll have all semester to do this. 10 years later, I'm like, man, I could do that on a weekend. I could just bust that out over a weekend, and I didn't even finish that assignment. I guess for me, it's like, we've kind of deviated from the original question here, but it's like, you have to want it so bad that you can push past doing it scared, and you can push past doing it bad. Yeah, sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something. Exactly, draw the shitty bicycles. Just get them out of your system. Okay, let's tackle the second half of this question now, or I am going to continue going off on weirdly motivational tangents. Okay, how did you figure out the style you wanted to draw in? So I get this question all the time. I love when people ask, how did you find your art style? Because it makes me think, do you think I just like picked it up off the side of the road? What do you mean find my art style? Where do you think I picked it up? I didn't find it. I built it with my own bare fucking hands. It's like, wow, where did you buy this delicious cake? Bitch, I made that. You do not find an art style, you build one, you develop it. And honestly, it literally is just a combination of seeing things that other people do in their art and being like, oh, I like that. Let me try that. Okay, maybe that didn't necessarily work. I don't know if I enjoy drawing like this, but I could do this, or I could do this, and let me just try this. It's just a lot of like experimenting and adding stuff to the cake and then being like, maybe I don't like this in the cake. Or, ooh, I really, really like this ingredient in my cake, so I'm gonna use this in my cake from now on. An art style is just taking all the things you love, a little bit of experimentation and, you know, sometimes getting a little quirky with it and sticking it all in a blender and just seeing what happens. For my comics specifically, it was a little bit more focused on a specific goal, because when I do like my illustrations and stuff, just like my one-off pieces, my art style is a little bit more polished than what I do for my comics, because I gotta churn out 2 fully colored, fully rendered comic pages every single week. And if I was putting as much effort into every single panel of my comic that I was putting into an illustration, it would take me 2 weeks to do 1 page. That would be ridiculous. And so my specific art style that I use for my comic pages is very streamlined, and it's very simple. I keep it very simplified and easy to draw. Easy to draw and efficient as well, because it's like, yeah, I enjoy drawing this way, but also I'm going to slim it down to just the basics so I can get through this a little faster, because, you know, I gotta draw 2 comic pages every single week, and that's a lot. But yeah, so it was a combination of taking bits and pieces, taking inspiration from other artists and being like, ooh, that looks fun. That looks fun, I wanna try that. No, I don't wanna try that. There's that saying that I've seen going around where it's like, I am a mosaic of all the people I've known before. And I feel like your art style is something similar. Your art style is a mosaic of all the things that you have loved and all the art that you have loved. As we progress through this life and as we do art and as we make things, we are subconsciously and sometimes consciously taking little pieces about the art that we love and building them into ourselves. A long time ago, there was this one artist who I really, really loved who always had like these really dynamic poses. And I'm like, wow, I love how those look. I really want to try doing more like fun and dynamic poses like that. I sat down and I studied their art and I had a lot of fun with it. And you know, my art does not look exactly like theirs, but I was like, I love this aspect of their art so much, I want to try and incorporate it into mine. And cue just doing that for every single artist that I have ever seen and ever had something that I loved about their art. And just, it's fun, it's experimenting, and it's like building your own things out of the people who have inspired you and come before. Oh, also, I'm gonna go ahead and put this in here too. Never let anyone trick you into thinking that you have to stick to one specific art style. You don't need one art style. Like, you're allowed to have range. People are like, I don't know what my art style is anymore. You don't have to stick to just one. You're allowed to fuck around. It's fine, guys. Don't worry so much. Allow yourself the freedom. Don't worry about it. We're having fun. Just draw. Just draw how you want to draw. It's fun. Screw around a bit. Life is too short. So many of my art tips come down to screw it, life is too short for this. Life is too short to worry about this. You know? How do you determine what medium to tell a story through? For example, I know you were originally writing Cast Off as a book. What made you realize it was better suited to comics? So the first time I started trying to attempt Cast Off story was as a comic. I came up with the story and I did like a short pilot comic that basically covered the events of the first chapter of the comic as it exists now, but it was very tonally different. It's much better now. This version is way better, but you know, I tried it as a comic, and then around the time that I tried it as a comic, a friend of mine introduced me to the concept of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, because they did it my freshman year of college, and I was like, oh, that sounds so cool. I want to try that, but what story do I write for it? And so I ended up writing Cast Off for my first attempt at National Novel Writing Month. Didn't NaNoWriMo get overtaken by AI slop? This was in 2011, so this was before that. Yeah, rest in fucking pieces. But yeah, so I was like, okay, I want to try writing a story as a novel. I've never written anything super long like this, but this should be fun and I want to try it. And so I took the story of the comic that I was planning on making into a comic and I tried doing it as a novel. And to my credit, I did finish the challenge. I wrote 50,000 words in 1 month of a novel version of Cast Off. And when I finished the challenge, I looked back on it and it was like, wow, I did not enjoy that. For Cast Off, like the way that Cast Off works is I was so heavily reliant on visuals for Cast Off, like the subtle way that characters' expressions change, the way that the magic is all very visual, the way that like Ariana's eyes change color given specific emotions. It's all like very subtle visual work, but that subtle visual work you can't do in a novel really because it's a written medium. And so for Cast Off specifically, I was like, this needs to be told in a visual medium, because I don't think this story will be as strong if I do not have the visuals to back it up. And so with Cast Off specifically, I was like, this needs to be a comic, I think. It started as a comic and I tried to experiment with other things and it didn't work out. This needs to be a comic. And I don't think this could be anything other than a comic. For my novels that I'm working on right now, I was like, well, these were not incepted as comics. These were incepted as spoken word stories because they started as Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. I'm not as tied to the visuals. And so it's much easier to do written works for those stories because I was not relying on the visuals to tell the story the first time I did it. So honestly, my advice would be like, if you don't know what medium to tell a story through, just try telling the story in a couple different mediums. Like maybe a comic is not gonna be right for you. Maybe you'd be better suited doing a novel. Or maybe you'd be better suited doing a visual novel or like an RPG Maker game or something like that. I think the best way to figure that out is to just experiment, figure out what you like doing, figure out what you don't like doing, and just test the waters, get in the pool, swim around, splash around, see if you like it, see if you like the vibe. You don't have to commit super hard to anything when you're just, you know, kind of experimenting. Like, try making a couple test comic pages, try writing a couple chapters, see how it makes you feel. Do you schedule specific days or times to work on your comic? Yes, I do. I didn't have a schedule for a long time. Over the years, I've sort of established a consistent weekly routine that I stick to, and that really, really helps having like a consistent day of the week that I set aside to work on specific things. And then if it's not that time, then I can do whatever the hell I want. It was very helpful for me. Like, setting specific work hours as a freelancer is extremely beneficial for me. So specifically for the comic, Monday and Tuesday are my comic days. Mondays and Tuesdays I have blocked out to work specifically on the comics, and that's like all I do. Usually on Monday, I'll do sketches, because I do thumbnails in batches, and I'll usually do those well in advance. So Monday, I'll take 2 pages and I will sketch them. And if I have time, I'll start on the inks. And then ideally, by the end of the day Monday, I have like inked and lettered comic pages. Tuesday is the day I set aside for coloring. And so that's when I will do my flats. Well, usually I do flats the day before because flats take such little time. I can just like lump them in with my inks. But yeah, sketching takes a long time just because sketching has to use brain power, but everything else I can just kind of like turn my brain off and like put a video on in the background and I just go. Tuesday is my day when I do all my rendering, and so that's basically fully coloring, shading, doing all the fun stuff, and that also takes a really long time, and so I dedicate its own day to it. Since I usually post 2 pages a week, I draw 2 pages a week. And so I'm sketching 2 pages at a time, and then I'm inking 2 pages at a time, and then I'm coloring 2 pages at a time. And that is my usual weekly workload. And then by the end of day Tuesday, I'm usually done with my comic work and I can focus the rest of the week on doing other stuff. So it all works out. Having a good schedule, very good idea. Highly recommend it. When working on your comic, do you work on 1 page at a time or do you do them in batches? So right now I do 2-page batches because my usual update schedule is that I post 2 pages a week. And so in order to keep up with that posting schedule, I have to draw 2 pages a week. And so what I'll do is I usually sketch in larger batches because I like to just like sit and spend an entire day like sketching comics, and then I don't have to worry about sketching until I run out of sketches. Right now I'm working on working my way through all of the pages that I sketched on a plane the last time I was out and about. I sketched like 10 pages in the airport and the airplane when I was on my way to MomoCon. I used to do larger buffers. For a long time, I would do like batches of 8 pages because, you know, I would do 8 pages a month. And so I would work on 8 pages at a time. And then I would finish a batch of pages and then I'd have a couple of days and then I'd start on the new one. But doing a month's worth of pages would take me approximately a month. And I did that for a while before I realized that it was really bad for me, because if I spent that long with a batch of pages in progress, I could not bring myself to work on anything else. So it would be like if I had a batch of pages that needed to be drawn and that I was like still inking or still coloring or what have you, if I ever sat down to draw, even for fun, like if I sat down to do something, my brain was like, you still have pages you need to work on. Why are you not working on pages? You need to work on these pages. You have a whole bunch of pages in progress and none of them are finished. What are you doing? And so I would freak out, and then I would like, I could only work on cast-off pages while a batch was in progress, but it would take 3 weeks for me to finish a batch of 8 pages. And then by the time I was done, I was tired, I was burnt out, and I would only have like a couple days to rest and recoup and work on other things before, time to start the next batch of pages because it's a new month. And that was not good for me. I at some point realized this is not healthy. And so then I started doing 2 pages a week. And then once I was done with the 2 pages I needed to do every week, I was not allowed to work on the comic until the following week. So for me, at this exact moment, this has shifted a little bit. For right now, the 2 days at the start of my week, which for me, I take my days off on Monday and Tuesday. So today is actually my Monday. Today is Wednesday. So today is the start of my week. So today I sketch if I need to, and then ink all of my comic pages, like both comic pages for the week. So I did that this morning. And then tomorrow will be coloring and rendering day. And so tomorrow I'll take those 2 pages and I'll color them and I'll render them. And then once those pages are done, I do not work on the comic again until next Wednesday. That's my schedule. And keep setting that boundary where it's like, okay, you've reached this point, you've accomplished what you need to do, you are not allowed to work on the comic anymore. It's gonna kind of help to cut back on the burnout and the workaholicness of my typical schedule. If you're considering working in batches, the whole point of that tangent I went on is that it might take a little bit to kind of figure out what a good work cycle is for you. But I recommend, experimenting a little bit. And then if you're on a certain schedule for a little while and you find that it's like, okay, here's what's working and here's what's not. Think about that, examine it, and if there's anything that's not working, try to experiment. How can you make it work better for you? Because if you're doing something like this for the long haul, that's a very important skill to develop, is the ability to just, know your limits, know your boundaries, and figure out what's not working and changing, and figure out what is working and feed into that. So, thumbs up. How do you deal with post-chapter burnout? I just finished a whole chapter of my webcomic and I've been suffering a bad art block / burnout. Any tips on how to get your mojo back? I definitely recommend taking a break between chapters, especially like really long chapters. I usually take about a month between chapters of the comic. I usually try to schedule something during the hiatus, like this most recent hiatus. I had some like bonus world building pages that were left over from the volume 1 book. And so that kind of helped keep people occupied while I was gone. Highly recommend though, just like take some time off to recharge. For me, that's usually just like either doing a lot of drawing or no drawing at all, but like just doing some fun drawing and stuff. I relax, I play some video games, I try to get out of my house, I visit friends, I try to make plans with people. Just go exist out in the world, try and get like some other places. Watch that show that you've been meaning to watch. Play that game you've been meaning to play. Genuinely just like a big way to deal with burnout is to just recharge your batteries by absorbing other like media to inspire you. Honestly, whenever people talk about burnout, I always feel the need is like, go watch Kiki's Delivery Service again. Because that is a movie about turning your hobby into your job and then suffering burnout from it. Like that's just what that movie is about. There's a quote from that movie where it's like, there was a time when I loved drawing, and then sometimes there's times that I didn't feel like drawing at all. And so I just didn't. I didn't draw at all. And then eventually you get your drive back, you get inspired again, and then you want to go back and you want to do it again. Then before you know it, you'll be flying again. It's a great movie. Highly recommended. Did you ever worry about not being able to get your stories in front of people? And this is a very interesting question. The thing about this is kind of a mantra that I had more when my audience was a lot smaller. When you make something, when you make art, when you make stories, you want people to read them. You want people to enjoy them. And a lot of times you can be like trying to get people to read these stories, and sometimes it doesn't work. And it can take a really, really, really long time to build up an audience. And I'm gonna make this metaphor just because I've been replaying this game recently. Building an audience is a bit like rolling a Katamari. You're starting up, you're picking up like little pencil erasers and little like mahjong tiles and like itty bitty like little paper clips and stuff. And you'll start with like just one person at a time, just starts reading the comic, and you'll rock with that for years and years. That's how it was the entire 3 years that I worked on my first webcomic. I think that Psy never had more than 50 readers, maybe 100 towards the end. It was a very small comic. It did not get a whole lot of views. I was mostly making it because I was having fun with it. And then when I started Cast Off, it was the same thing. I had kind of built an audience. I had a couple of people who followed me over from my first comic, and I started picking up a little bit more speed. I started with a more established audience, but it was still a small audience. You pick it up slowly. But over time, if you're consistent with it, and as you keep going, and if you advertise effectively, which is a whole other spiel I could go off on, you'll gradually build an audience. But as far as like being worried about getting my stories in front of people, there's kind of a mantra that I've had ever since I first started Cast Off. I am doing this to make myself happy. I am making this for me because I want to and because I love it. And there's like 2 of my friends and like online mutuals who have told me that they like the comic. And as long as they enjoy it, I am happy. Even if I was only doing this for me and the very small handful of people in my immediate support group who like it, even if I was just showing it to them and they were the only ones reading it, I would be happy with that. And I feel like that's a good attitude to have. You can't worry about the numbers because the numbers will always disappoint you. You will always want that Katamari to be bigger than it actually is. But I would say do it primarily for yourself. And if you've got just like 2 or 3 friends who like what you write, that's enough. And I mean, honestly, even if you're just doing it for yourself, that can probably be enough. But you know, we're artists and we like to share things. So I think like, if you can find just like a good support group of like 2 or 3 people who like your work and are excited to see what you make, that's enough, really. I mean, it's not enough if you want to make this your career, but I feel like if you just want to do this for the joy of doing it, that's enough. And that was what I was rocking with for a long time. It's like the first like 5, 6, 7 years of Cast Off, I was just like, yeah, you know, my audience is slowly but steadily growing. I've got a lot of people who really like this comic, but even now, as long as me and my friends like it, I'll be okay. How do you get people interested in your webcomic / stories? Aside from yapping about it with friends, I always find it hard to get it to catch on outside my friend circle. What I have found works, through lots of experimentation, being passionate about your characters and being loudly passionate where other people can hear you. I'll give you a good example with my D&D characters. These are characters whose stories only exist in my head, in the campaigns I play them in, and right now, that's it. I'm in the process of, you know, working on making other stuff with them. So what I have found works is, you know, people can sometimes get drawn to a character just by how they look. Because if a character has like a really distinctive and interesting design, or if someone really likes your art style, that can be one way of getting them interested in your characters. I know that I have people who I follow who I see their OCs and I'm just like, oh, that's that cute OC that they're always drawing. But I don't really get super invested in those characters because I know nothing about them. Yes, they are cute. They have a cute visual design, but I'm not in any way really like invested in them because I don't know anything about them aside from what they look like. What really gets me interested in a character is seeing what makes them tick. And let me be more specific. I follow a lot of people on like Blue Sky and social media and stuff where they talk about their original characters, but they don't just talk about them. They'll make like little mini stories about the characters. They'll make like little mini comics. They'll post little doodles talking about the characters, and they'll like make stuff with those characters, just like little bite-sized things that you could draw about the characters. And you know, I do this too. I do little sketchbook comics talking about my character stories and like showing moments from our D&D campaigns and just like showing little bits, little tidbits to get people interested. Just little fragments of the story and being like, hey, you see this character? This is what their story is. I found that people can be drawn to a character from appearance, but people get invested in a story. And so rather than just drawing random pinup of your OC number 207, if you want people to really get invested and interested in these characters, they have to know the story. And so then you have to think about, how do you get that story in front of people? Sometimes that's just yapping on Tumblr. Sometimes, and this is more effective for me because, you know, I like art and I like reading comics, is if you make just like little itty bitty comics just about the character, like 1-2 panel comics even, just like showing little tidbits from their stories, showing how they interact with people, showing little bits of their lore, showing how their magic powers work. All this kind of stuff is just like little ways of people like learning more about the characters subconsciously and then being like, oh, okay, I know this OC. I know this stuff because I've seen them post about this character. Like, I'll be honest, I follow people who have like their own OCs and I'm not super invested in them just because it's like, it's not really the type of thing that I'm interested in, but I see them posting about their OCs all the time and I know a lot about their OCs and the personalities of their OCs because they post like these itty bitty little comics of them all the time, and I see these characters like interacting with others and like having little moments between each other and just like these itty bitty little things things. And I find myself like learning more about these characters. And if you do that for webcomic characters, and then you say, hey, by the way, if you like these characters, there's a whole comic about them you can read for more context. Like, that is a great way to get people interested. And I feel like more webcomics people should be doing that. I know it's like you're already making a comic and doing even more work is a lot, but they don't have to be like high quality. These can be just like little bitty doodles. These can be like little sketchbook comics, like the kind that I make, just like little bitty bits. Just drip feed people little tidbits of story. And that, I think, is the most important thing to get people invested. People will get interested in a character, they get invested in a story. How long does it take you to make one page approximately? So for me, cast off pages, like I said, I do them in batches of 2. So it's a little hard to say exactly how long a single page takes me, because I'm usually working on 2 at a time. And it also varies pretty significantly. It depends on the number of panels on a page. It depends on how many characters are in the scene and how many times I have to draw them. Like, how many figures do I have to draw across this entire page? How intense are the backgrounds? How much backgrounds are there? Are there any like really detailed establishing shots that I need to do? Are there any group shots? How much detail? All of that impacts like how long a page will take. But I'll give you guys an estimate. I would say that a very simple page that does not have a whole lot of detail on it can take me as little as 3 to 4 hours. If it's just like a really, really simple page with like only a couple panels on it or not a whole lot going on. Okay, so for example, this is a page of cast off that did not take me very long, because if you look at it, it's only 4 panels. It is 3 figures. There are no backgrounds. This page was laughably easy. This page took me like probably 3 hours to draw in total. Maybe 4, probably closer to 3. This was an easy page. Easy page for babies. Baby easy page. Let me go back and show you one that's different. So this is another page. This is from chapter 11. This freaking background. This freaking library. Why? Why did I do this to myself? This page took probably like 8 to 10 hours. Because like you've got a lot of the characters in there. You did all this. I had to make a 3D model to draw this background from so many angles. Long ass page. Lot of drawing. But then you also have pages that just have a whole lot of characters on them. So this is an example of a page that's complicated, but not necessarily because of the backgrounds. I had to draw so many characters on this page. Because like there's at least 2 characters in every single panel. Like down here, there's 4 characters in each panel. Oh my God, this took so long to draw just because there's so many characters on the dang page. So pages like these 2 will take longer. On average, I would say probably about 6 hours per page. But that can vary significantly based on the number of characters, the amount of backgrounds, the amount of detail, the number of panels, etc., etc. So there you go. There's a little bit more intel for y'all. How long does it take you to finish a page of cast off? What are your biggest time-saving techniques / ways you streamline your process? So I already answered the first one just now, but I can definitely go into that second question a little bit more about the time-saving techniques / ways you streamline your process. Biggest ways that I have developed over the past couple of years. Number 1, fill bucket. Fill bucket for coloring. Oh my God. Listen, I'm like a camp counselor and I'm pulling up a chair and I'm sitting in it backwards to show that I'm on the level and I'm cool. I'm looking out over all of y'all, my little audience of little campers. Listen, you guys can do art however you want. I'm not here to tell you that you have to do it a certain way. That's the last thing I want to do. I'm not here to do that. However, if you are a professional, you are on a deadline and you are getting paid, please, I am putting my hands together and I am praying. I'm doing the praying emoji. I am looking at you guys, my little campers. Please don't color your pages like a coloring book. I'm on my knees begging you guys to love yourselves a little bit more and just like The deadlines are approaching and you're not getting any younger. Please just learn how to use the fill bucket if you want to learn how to draw faster, guys. If you want to draw faster, just learn how to use the fill bucket. I made a whole video on it. I made an art tutorial about how I like color really fast, and I can do an entire colored illustration in like an hour. And it's all because of my best friend, Fill Bucket. And if you say to yourself, but Star, the fill bucket doesn't work the way I want to. If you use Clip Studio Paint, please go look up that video I made on how to use the fill bucket and how to color faster. It will save you guys literal hours. And it's like, listen, again, I can't tell you what to do. I am just simply saying it's a skill worth learning if you want to not burn out. If you just want to be able to get this coloring done, fill bucket. We've got it in the chat. There's a link right there. I'll make sure that the link is also in the video. So that's a huge one. Flatting my comic pages takes like 15 minutes. It's so easy. It's so easy. And it's like every time I see a speed paint of someone who colors like a coloring book, I don't drink, but if I did, it would drive me to drink. It's that type of thing. It's like, you can do whatever the hell you want for fun if you find it relaxing, but if you are, you know, trying to make a webcomic and you've got deadlines and you've got all this other stuff and if you need to go fast, there is so much value in learning the shortcuts. Anyway, another method, learning some extremely remedial 3D modeling will save you so much time and make it so much easier, because you'll be able to just like get the exact perspective you want and take a screenshot. You'll be able to loosely trace over the 3D models so you don't have to draw all your backgrounds from scratch. Saves me so much time. Oh my God. Having a file with just like all the flat colors for your characters readily available so you can always go back and reference them is also a good idea. It's less time saving and more just like, hey, have it readily available so you're not having to hunt for your color swatches. I think those are gonna be my main big ones. But honestly, just those two alone will save you hours, especially the fill bucket stuff and the various speedy coloring techniques that I exposit about in that video. Go watch that video, by the way. Cough. How do you plan panel layout? Do you have any rules about panel variation that you follow? An excellent question. I have an entire section in my book, How to Webcomic, where I kind of talk about this and I use a lot of pictures and stuff, but I can go ahead and pull up some of those pictures to show you guys here. So a couple of key features here. Panel sizes is a big thing. The larger your panels are, the more time your reader is going to spend looking at it. So this big ol' establishing shot, your reader's gonna look at this a lot longer than they look at something like this, where it's just like one little guy. One little guy alone in his panel, your audience is gonna skim right back over that. Sometimes that's what you want. If you want the audience to linger, bigger panel. If you want it to just be like a short, quick little moment, little panel. I generally do no more than a 3x3 grid, but I also like to mix it up. This is just a personal rule of mine. You don't have to follow this, but I personally like to have at least one full width panel in every page. That's just for me. I hit that about 95% of my cast off pages. I try to have at least one panel that is the full width. I wouldn't do more than like a 3x3 grid. My pages are tall, so I sometimes do 3x4. Yeah, so you can mix it up, mix and match. Varying panel sizes will make it look more interesting. I've seen people make comics and their pages look like this, and I don't want to be mean and say that it's bad, but it is boring to look at if all your panels are the same sizes. And like, this is better, but it's still kind of stale, you know? You can also, I personally like to use tilty pages. I like to use tilty panels for really like dramatic scenes. If it's dramatic and there's a lot of stuff happening, I do like tilty panels. You can also have your dudes pop out of the panel. So then we also talk a little bit more about panel flow. You have to think about the direction that your readers are going to be reading it in. We read English, so we read left to right, top to bottom. And so people will generally read like this, first row, and then the second row left to right, and then the third row left to right. And so you gotta kind of be conscious about how your panels flow and how your readers are going to be reading them. I'll let the book kind of speak for itself there. I have a couple more tips just on like general stuff, but this is just like some kind of general paneling things to keep in mind. Also, I will go ahead and say, I highly recommend figuring out your panels in the thumbnailing stage, where you're basically just like drawing your characters as little stick figures and experimenting with a couple of different layouts for every single page, just to kind of see what works. Panels are complicated, but I find that the more you do it, the more you kind of get a wrangle on what each scene is going to call for. Let's wrap it up with like the biggest tips here. Use varied panel sizes. Being able to use different panel sizes is one of the joys of the medium, so don't lock yourself into having like every single panel be the exact same size. Try to mix it up. Try and like make your layouts a little bit more interesting. Try to, you know, like have different sizes, different variances. Bigger panels are generally for like more important moments. Smaller panels are for the smaller, quicker moments. Mix it up. Tilty panels for more action-oriented shots. And buy my book, available at TheStarfishface.com. It's called How to Webcomic. You guys would not believe how many times I got questions about paneling. It's something that I guess scares people, but panels are fun. I like panels. I guess just like one more little tip about paneling. If you want some further research, look up storyboarding and like different storyboarding techniques for people. Study screen design specifically. Like watch some videos about screen design, watch some videos about storyboarding, because the two mediums are very closely related to each other, and a lot of times rules that apply to one will apply to the other. And being a little bit of a film nerd and learning about screen design and the different rules of screen design, absolutely enormously helpful for comics, just because, you know, it's telling a story with the visual medium. There is overlap there, and so learning about one will oftentimes help you learn more about the other. So there's one final tip for y'all. How long do you suggest webcomic chapters be? And to build off this, what advice do you have for planning out what goes into each chapter? So this is also going to depend on what exactly you mean by a chapter, because the meaning of that term has changed a little bit with the onset of stuff like Webtoon. On Webtoon, and I guess also on Tapas, where you have like longer updates, people will call a batch of updates a chapter. It's so weird because I do not think of chapters this way. With myself, and I know a lot of other comic artists who don't necessarily do the Webtoon format, a chapter is like a chapter in a novel. And so this is more a question about like, okay, how long is each chapter of your novel? Because for me, it's like a graphic novel, right? I tell stories in this format, and each chapter is like a series of scenes. And so how long your chapters are, honestly, it's gonna kind of be a matter of personal taste. Like, I've seen comics that will just end a chapter in the middle of a scene, and then the scene will pick up exactly where it left off in the next chapter. And I always personally thought that was a little bit silly. Me, personally, I pace Cast-Off and Cast-Off's chapters like an anime a little bit. So I imagine that if each chapter is roughly a 20-minute episode of a show, like an anime or like a cartoon or something, how much would you be able to fit reasonably into a 20-minute episode of like TV? That's how much I do for each chapter. And for me, it's less about page count and more about the events of the chapter, because some chapters will need more pages just because of the pacing, or like action scenes will balloon your page count like nothing else. Scenes with a lot of talking tend to be a little bit more condensed sometimes. It's very individualized. It's gonna depend. Now, if you're doing something like Webtoon and you're thinking about how long each update should be, I'm gonna call them updates from now on because I refuse to call them chapters because I'm old and I'm an old man shaking my cane at the sky. For each update, I would say get through a decent story beat, but I don't do Webtoon style comics, and so it's a little bit harder for me to suggest how to do those. I would say just like make sure that there's at least a story beat for the readers to sink their teeth into, but also like don't try and push out 40, 50, 60 panels per update if you're updating weekly and you can't keep up with it all. Like it's a complicated question because it is going to heavily depend on what you yourself are capable of. And the solution for that is always going to be test things out experiment, see what works for you, see what's reasonable, look for feedback from your readers and your friends, get some friends to read it and be like, hey, do you guys think this is enough or should I go on it a little bit longer? See what works for you and your schedule and your update schedule and how much you can be putting into each update, all this other stuff. It really comes down to experimenting, and that's why I said before, learning how to experiment and learn from the results of your experiments is one of the best skills you can learn in this kind of field. Test it out, figure it out. Godspeed. How do you draw characters consistently? This got asked a surprising number of times. I'll get the annoying answer out of the way. How do you draw characters consistently? You just do. You just do. But that's the annoying answer, so let me try and give something a little bit more, substantial. Drawing the same character over and over again from a bunch of different angles and making a bunch of different facial expressions, not only is that fun for me, it's also kind of drilling that character's look and design and how to draw them into my head. And so by the time I'm actually making a comic or doing something more with these characters, I've run my drills, I've done my laps, to a point where it almost becomes muscle memory. Like, I could draw just about any character from Cast Off just off the cuff right now because it's muscle memory. I don't have to think about what they look like. I could draw them with my eyes closed at this point. There's a couple of like little details that I sometimes have to go back and check for characters I don't draw super often. Like, for example, I am constantly forgetting what ear Zara's one earring is in because I made that bitch asymmetrical and I've regretted it ever since. Because I constantly forget what side it's on. Aside from that, for me, repetition helps. Repetition helps a ton. And then everybody, of course, is screaming in the chat, make reference sheets. And yes, that also. See, my thing, why I say do some drills, build that muscle memory, exactly. The reason I say that is because for me, like, I can see a character's design in a model sheet and I can use that to remember what they look like. But for me, running the drills and drawing the character a whole bunch over and over and over again, that actually helps more for like drawing them consistently, I've found. Sometimes you draw a character for the first time, cool, but then you draw the character a second time and you're drawing the same design, but they feel different. And I feel like that's what a lot of times people have struggles with. So yeah, a character model sheet will make sure you're drawing their design the same way every time. But actually doing those drills, doing that repetition, really burning how to draw them into your memory will help you a lot more in the long run, I find. Get a page of your sketchbook and draw them like 12 times. Just draw them in a grid. Just draw a bunch of little guys. It's good for you. It's good for the soul. Get that muscle memory down. Suss out your blorbos. I also find that sometimes a character's design will change and adapt as I draw them more. And honestly, drawing a character during the process of developing their personality is a hugely important step. Like, there's times where it's like, I can't figure out how to write this character until I've drawn them like 50 times. Because I'm like, I have to figure out who you are, which means that I have to draw you until I feel like I get your vibes. I have to draw you until I understand you. And so, you know, just like drawing them over and over again, you're not only working on the muscle memory, but it's also helping you figure out who they are. Consistency comes with practice, and practice makes progress. Let's go! Draw thine blorbos over and over again. Brain rot yourself. It's fun. Do you have any tips for making interesting/unique outfits while keeping them simple enough for drawing over and over in comics? So this is a little bit of a question that's hard for me specifically to answer, because if I am being completely honest, and this is not me fishing for compliments or anything, this is literally just how I feel, I don't think I am the best at coming up with interesting outfits for my characters. Like, I feel like I focus a little bit too much on slimming down on detail to the point where my characters' outfits aren't as interesting as they could be. I'll have a lot of fun designing stuff for one-off illustrations, but like designing characters, I do feel like sometimes I value simplicity more than anything else, to almost a detriment to the characters. I'm actually in the process of reworking Lapis's outfit just a touch, just to make it a little bit more visually interesting. But in terms of simplifying stuff, I do have tips for that. So what I like to do when I am designing a character is I will look up a lot of references, and I will look up different types of sleeves and different outfits. I'll kind of like make a mood board of like, this is kind of what I'm going for with this character. Yeah, references. Definitely look up like fashion references and things of that nature. And if you're like me, a founding member of the Society for Tasteful Anachronisms, I don't necessarily worry so much about stuff being like historically accurate because I write fantasy and I don't give a shit. I just like to look at stuff that's interesting, that like has an interesting shape. Do these sleeves look interesting? Would this character wear something like this? I'm also coming from a cosplay background because I used to cosplay a lot, and so I like to think about the practicality of certain outfits where I'll draw a character wearing something and be like, they would never wear this because the way that this sleeve is shaped, that would be so annoying to move in. So no, you're not actually going to have a sleeve like this. It's another reason why my outfits are also simple and practical, is because I imagine them wearing them and I'm like, oh god, that would be a pain to wear. But anyway, it's also why my characters always have like pouches and bags and little backpacks and stuff, because I'm like, they gotta put their stuff somewhere. This is the stuff I think about. But as far as like simplifying them, what I usually do is I'll design a character and then I will draw their outfit over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. As I'm burning their design into my brain, I'll just draw them and their outfit over and over and over again. And I will see like, okay, this detail is hard to draw. Maybe I can simplify it. Maybe I can slim it down. Or if there's details I constantly forget, those will often just disappear from the design. Like if I give a character like a weird little detail, it's gonna get forgotten past a certain point, and it just, whew, it goes away. It goes away. I just cut down on a lot of like unnecessary detail and just keep like the bare bones, but enough of the bones to keep it interesting, you know? And so for me, a lot of times that just comes from drawing the same thing over and over and over again until it coagulates into a good outfit that's easy to draw, fast to draw. You kind of streamline it by drawing it over and over and over again, right? This is just me coming on my little soapbox and telling all y'all to just draw your blorbos like a bajillion times. We draw our characters here. We have fun here. Draw thine blorbos 1 billion times. You'll thank me later. Just do it. How do you balance visual storytelling with written dialogue or narration in your webcomics? Do you ever cut written scenes because the visuals already say enough? This is a fantastic question. I love this question because this is such a huge thing. This is like the show don't tell argument, right? If you guys are not familiar, show don't tell is a thing in visual storytelling mediums like comics, but also movies and TV. Anything that you're telling a story and there is a visual element, there is a spectrum. We'll call it a spectrum, where on the one side, there's telling, which is where a character will just kind of exposit to you, the reader. They're not gonna break the fourth wall, but it's like, how often do you have a character just say how something is? And then how often do you just show that in your visual medium because you have the visuals? For example, telling would be a character saying, my favorite color is blue. So now you as the audience can know that that character's favorite color is blue. Or showing would be the character doesn't ever outright say, my favorite color is blue, but they'll probably wear a lot of blue clothes and their phone will be blue. They'll have like little blue accessories. Maybe their bedroom is painted blue or their sheets are blue, like where they sleep. They have like blue clothes, they'll have blue shoes. If you start to associate that color with that character, you might start thinking, oh, this character's favorite color is blue. And there might be some form of doubt there because the character never outright came onto screen and said, my favorite color is blue. But you can look at the context you are given and you can figure it out. And so that's kind of a very bare bones method of what show versus tell is. Tell is directly giving the information to the audience, and show is dropping hints and clues and context that will make you come to that conclusion without outright telling you something. There was actually a TikTok video I watched a long time ago that had a great way of talking about how to balance the two. If it's something that you want to linger on. If this is information that you kind of want to just seep into the world naturally, then showing is better. Showing is better for like steeping it slowly into the world. I've got a food metaphor. I'm working on a food metaphor in my head right now. Showing is like steeping a tea, right? You put the leaves in and you just kind of let it simmer, and you're just like, you let it develop kind of naturally. It takes a little bit more time. You have to kind of linger on it. Showing usually takes longer because you have to establish it more. It's kind of, you're being a little bit more covert with it. Telling is like putting that shit in the microwave. Telling is putting a Hot Pocket in the microwave. It's straightforward, it's easy, boom, done. You spend 2 minutes and then you have a Hot Pocket, you have a ready-made meal, you're good. If it's something important that you don't want to spend a lot of time with, it's just like, okay, I just need to tell my audience that 2 + 2 is 4. You can just tell them that 2 + 2 is 4. It saves a lot of time. You don't need to go all through the thing of showing them 1 + 1 and equals 2, and then 2 + 2 equals 4. That's a lot of time. Just tell them that 2 + 2, just show and tell both have their place. That's why I called it a spectrum. It's like kind of, okay, I see a lot of people teasing me about leaving shit in the microwave. That happened last stream and we don't need to linger on it, okay? Some things are too mundane and tedious to show. Yeah, a lot of just like detailed world building where it's just like, we don't need to linger on this. You just kind of need to understand it. That's where telling can come in a little bit easier. You can just tell your audience things. You don't have to linger on that. Showing is good for like atmosphere. Showing is good for stuff that you want your readers to intuit rather than just telling them. I try to err more on show rather than tell because I think that show is more interesting, but also you can't show everything, and there is definitely value in just like sitting your audience down and being like, okay, this is how things work. Especially in like a fantasy series, right? But insofar as, do you ever cut written scenes because the visuals already say enough? In kind of a twist on that, I know that some people who have read Cast Off are familiar with the story. I have switched to showing things because in the original draft of the script, I used tell too much, and I found that it made the story really boring. So the example of this is the existence of Cast Off Chapter 12. Cast Off Chapter 12, if you are not familiar, is a flashback. Most of the chapter is one of the characters telling the rest of the characters, this is what happened in the past and how it affected me and how it also affects you guys by extension. Originally, that chapter was just him expositing, and we got his narration over just like a montage of scenes, and it would have been like 10 pages total. But instead, I looked at my script and I said, you know what? This is boring and I can do this better. And so I basically added in an entire chapter to make it a proper flashback instead, to show all of that impact and that emotional hits and like how important, because it was like a very important thing for the universe, and it was a very dramatic thing. It was a very important moment for like not just the character telling the story, but it also was really relevant to the entire story as a whole. It was basically the inciting incident for the entire narrative. I was like, I need to show this. This will be much better and more cinematic, and it will hit a lot harder if I take the time to show this to my audience instead of just making them read 10 plus pages of a character expositing to the rest of the cast. But there have also been times where it's like, okay, I don't think I need to do quite so much telling because the visuals do enough. This was something that I picked up and kind of learned a little bit more when I was working on my first comic, Psy. I remember very specifically when I was working on Psy, I don't know how I got myself into this mindset, but I remember thinking if my readers had questions, I was doing a bad job because it means that I'm not explaining things enough. It could be like really mundane shit too, like, oh, does this character like gardening? And I was just like, oh no, I'm not clear enough about the character liking gardening. While they're actively sitting in their garden, gardening. Oh my God, I need to be telling the audience more because they're not gonna be able to intuit this. I'm leaving my audience with questions. No. I at some point realized, a little bit further down the road, that people asking questions means that they are invested in the story. It does not mean that you are doing a bad job at telling the story if your readers have questions. Also of note is that webcomics are a very slow storytelling medium. You don't have to answer every single question immediately. You can let things linger. You can take your time to like show things and not have to worry about telling every single reader, going into every single detail about every single character, whoever shows up in your narrative. Just like let your readers have questions and explain things when they're important. And if you're unsure whether the point is getting across correctly, show your scripts to beta readers. Show people your scripts and then ask them, what did you gain from this scene? What did you learn? And ideally, people should be learning something from every scene in your comic. What I like to do sometimes, if I really want to make sure that what is coming across is doing well, I will make notes on the sides of my scripts at the end of every scene, being like, what did people 100% learn from this scene? What can they intuit from what they learned from this scene? How does it mesh with things that they've learned previously? And what questions will they still have after this scene is over? And I use that and I take that into account as I move forward with my writing. So I think when you're trying to figure out if you should show or if you should tell, try and think about what experience you want your reader to have. How important is it that they have this information? How much time do you want to spend on it? How important is it that they really, really get this hint that you're trying to lay down? Or is it something that can be a little bit more unclear and more uncertain and not necessarily going to like harm the storytelling aspects? It's like riding a bike. It's a skill that can really only be learned by doing it, but it is a skill that focusing on will help you learn a bit faster and easier. Do you have a recommendation on how much buffer to have for a comic? So this is going to be another one of those things where it's going to kind of depend on you and your exact schedule and how much you can reasonably do. I personally like to be approximately a month ahead with my buffer. So for me, because I do 2 pages a week, that's on average 8 pages a month. I try to be 8 pages ahead of my buffer. If you're not aware, a buffer is, so say for example, I'm posting a comic and I post a page every week. If I post page 3 on the website, I have pages that are already finished that are just like locked and loaded and waiting to be posted. And so while page 3 is on the website, I might be working on page 12 or page 11 or 10 or what have you. Basically, it just means like being ahead on your work so that you're not rushing to get new pages done every single week and then hitting publish basically as soon as you're done. I used to do that. It was a nightmare. I don't recommend it because if you have no buffer, what might happen is that you might, hypothetically, you might get hit by a truck and hurt your wrist and then you can't draw for a while and then you're basically forced to go onto a comic hiatus because you have no buffer, you have no backlog of pages. But if you have a buffer, if you, get hit by a truck, but then you still have 6 more weeks of pages in your backlog of buffer, you can still keep posting pages even though your wrist is broken because you've been hit by a truck. You don't have to stop the webcomic just because you can't work on pages actively. It just helps you be a little bit more consistent even when life is crazy and you have to juggle a bunch of stuff. Buffer is just how to shield yourself from life. Highly recommend a buffer. Again, it's gonna be individual per person. It's okay to experiment. I feel like a bigger buffer is generally better, but if you're too far ahead, sometimes you can get itchy and you'll be like, I just finished this page and this page is so cool, but I can't show it to people for 3 more months. I find that about a month ahead is a good average for me. It could vary for you. You might like more, you might be okay with less. Just, figure out what you're comfy with. Figure out, experiment. If you want to keep a bigger buffer just to be safe and you feel like you're going to get antsy from not being able to show people pages, have a small group of friends in a group chat where you can just like show them pages early. I call them my spoiler squad, and I just drop pages as soon as I finish them and I show them to those people, and then that kind of takes the edge off a little bit. Did you make the website for Castoff, and what did you use to make it? So Castoff has had a couple of different websites. The current website, as it exists on the internet right this second, I did not make. I paid a friend of mine several dollars to code the website for me. I told her what I wanted, and I was like, I wanted to be able to do this. And then she put it together for me on a comic CMS content management system. It's like a scaffolding that you can build a website on, basically. I am extremely coding illiterate, you guys. If you try to teach me how a website backend works, I do spontaneously burst into flames. People have tried, and I had to buy them a new fire extinguisher because they used up their first one trying to extinguish me after my brain spontaneously caught fire when they were trying to explain like HTML and JavaScript and things to me. It's bad. So I generally, when I can, I will shop that work out to other people. So commissioning a website is very much a thing you can do. If you guys want to commission the person who made Castoff's website, their contact information is in the footer of the website. I'm not sure what they're going on by now. Their name is Alyssa. They used to make a webcomic. They do not anymore. I don't know how much space they have these days, but you can definitely get their contact information. Just go on the Castoff's website and scroll all the way down to the bottom, and there will be website credits listed there. If you maybe don't have the money to commission someone to make a website for you, a decent option for making your own website, it will still cost money because you'll have to pay to get a domain name and you'll have to pay for hosting, but you can use WordPress. There's a couple of WordPress themes that are specifically made for webcomics. I know that Inkblot, I believe, is the first one I can think of off the top of my head. I think there's a couple more. I don't know if the one that Castoff's site used to be made with is still in service, but there are a couple of different WordPress themes you can use that will manage files and pages just like a webcomic. So that is a way that you can make a website, is by using WordPress. It wasn't great. It loaded a little bit slow, but it was real easy. It was drag and drop. It was easy for me, a coding illiterate person, to figure out with just like poking and prodding at it. Also, if you want something kind of in the middle where you want to make a custom website, but you don't necessarily have the money, I've never used it personally, but I know that Comic Fury is a comic hosting platform that allows you a lot more customization than, say, for example, Webtoon or Tapas. You can functionally make your own website on Comic Fury, but it's still hosted on their server, so you don't have to pay for it. Couple of different options. I wish I could help more, but I don't want my brain to spontaneously combust. So WordPress is a good intermediary. Commissioning someone to make the website for you is also an option. Godspeed, because I can't help you with that really anymore. Anytime I want to make a change to the website, I have to go crawling into my webmaster's DMs and be like, hey, can you help me switch these buttons around? And they'll be like, yeah, okay, sure. What fonts do you find the best to use for comics? So this is something that's gonna have a couple of different answers, again, depending on the style of your comic that you're going for. Standard comic book fonts are generally in all caps. Comics back in the day used all caps fonts because they were easier to read, highly condensed, and like printed really small. Nowadays, we are not restrained by the same restrictions, but people have kind of gotten used to it. And so that's why a lot of comics still use all caps fonts. This is what I understand. This might not be entirely correct, but that is what I have heard. A lot of people still use all caps fonts just because that is tradition, but there's also no harm in breaking tradition if a mixed case font works better for you. If you want to learn about comic lettering, you want to learn like way more information than you will ever need about comic lettering, the website Blambot, BLAMBOT, has an entire section on their website with a ton of tips on comic lettering. Go through, read all that. It's basically a textbook for learning how to make words good in your comic. They also have a lot of fonts for download. So we're talking about what fonts are the best to use for comics. Blambot, that website, has so many free ones. Free and perfect for use in comics. A lot of them are free, some of them are paid. There will be a lot of like lettering specific fonts on Blambot. I believe the one that I used, I downloaded from there. Aside from, you know, just the general tips, make sure that it's legible. Don't letter your comic in wingdings, please. What I would say the most important things are, A, Is it easy to read? Is it legible? Is it going to give people headaches if they're reading it for long periods of time? If the answer is like it gives people headaches, then you probably don't want to use that font. Is it easy to read when it is small? No, probably want to choose a different font. Another thing to consider is, does the look of the font match the look of your comic? This is something that I see people maybe not take into account quite so much. I'll use an extreme example. Like, say that you're making a high fantasy webcomic and you use a font that looks like an 8-bit font from a video game, like it's very pixely. Those two things maybe don't necessarily stylistically go together, right? Or say, for example, you have like this epic futuristic sci-fi comic that's like very high tech. It takes place in space and it does all this stuff. And then you use like a frilly serif cursive font. Maybe they don't match so much, you know? So I would say test out a couple of different fonts. Maybe do like a full panel of your comic and then test out a couple of different fonts and show it to some other people, see what they think. Say, hey, are any of these fonts easier to read or more difficult to read than others? Do you think that this font matches the style of the comic? So like for me, I have a font that I made with my handwriting, but I don't prefer it just because like my comics artwork is typically very simple and very clean. Is the way that you're making me feel tonight. Sorry, I had to get that in there. So I use a font that's very no nonsense. It's very simple. It's very clean. It's very easy to read. It's an all caps font. It's a font made for comics, but it's also kind of like the strokes are kind of thick, you know? If your art looks a little bit messier, a little bit more hand-drawn, maybe like a font that looks a little bit messier, a little bit scribblier, a little bit more hand-drawn, but still legible would be good for that. So it's really just a matter of like matching the font to how your artwork looks. But yeah, just in general, Blambot has a lot of tips. Just make sure whatever you choose that it's legible at small sizes and try to match it to the vibe of your comic as well. How would you suggest new webcomic authors advertise their comics? Great question, because ain't that just the question of the day? Everybody's making comics and they just want to know how to get those comics in front of people. And it's hard, it really is hard. I'll go ahead and say this right off the bat. Don't feel bad if advertising and marketing your comic doesn't come naturally to you, because learning how to make a comic and learning how to advertise and market that comic and get readers for that comic, two entirely different skill sets. Not everyone's gonna have the marketing brain. A lot of times the marketing brain, it's like an entirely different skill set. There's like basically no overlap between the two. So don't feel bad if you don't feel like you're doing a good job or if you feel like it doesn't come to you naturally. For most people, I would argue it doesn't. We just want to sit and we just want to draw our stories. We don't have to worry about getting them in front of other people. That's the hard part. That's the annoying part. No one wants to do that. Star enjoys it because Star finds social media fascinating, but I'm just lucky in that I have that part of my brain that's activated most of the time. I find the strategies of it interesting, but it's also not something I would want to do for a job. It's something I do as a means to an end, which is getting people to read my comic, you know? So as far as how do you actually do it, social media is gonna be the one that you know what? I'll just walk you guys through my social media strategy and you can either learn something from that or not. This is the pattern I have settled into from doing this for years. And this is the advice that I have. Every time you post a new page, post a reminder on social media. What I do is I take a panel, I crop it down, and I post that. I'll put like the comic's title, or I'll put the website URL in the picture. Here, I can grab these for you. I'll make something like this for every single one of my comic pages, and then this is what ends up getting posted on social media. So it's just like a crop of an interesting thing that's happening on that page for this week's update. And so you'll see this, and you'll see I've got the comic URL down in the corner here. And so I'll post that, and I'll post like a catchy little one-liner that kind of hints as to what's going on the page. And I'll say, new cast-off update, and then I'll post this image, and then I will have a link to the new page, specifically to the new page. If it's relevant to the platform, I'll also include some hashtags like comic, webcomic, indie comic, fantasy comic, things of that nature. But you can also do more generic hashtags like magic, fantasy, stuff like that on Blue Sky, which is the one that I primarily use these days. Using the tags like OC, original character, OC Sky, which is like OCs on Blue Sky, actually works decently well. And so whenever I post cast-off updates, I will usually include just a handful of hashtags that I've had luck with. If you're not sure what hashtags to use, look at other webcomic folks who are successful. Look at people whose comic pages actually get traction and see what hashtags they're using. You're not going to be able to perfectly emulate their success because they've built up that audience over a long period of time, but experimenting with methods that work for other people is a good way to try and suss out what might work for you and just take it and experiment. I put a million hashtags that vaguely make sense and usually it works. So you can do that, but also depending on the platform, too many hashtags can nerf your post. That's something that people are always fighting about on Instagram, if there's like a quote perfect number of hashtags to use. And Instagram annoys me, so I don't use it anymore. But also a side effect is that if you use too many hashtags on something like Twitter or Blue Sky, you might start to look like a tryhard and it might annoy people and it might turn them off and they might not want to read it. So I would stick to like just a handful, like figure out which one of those work, like where people are coming from, and just use those. I usually use just like art, OC Sky, things like that. I focus my social media efforts on sites that return the favor. We'll put it that way. I started getting less engagement on Twitter because Twitter wants you to be posting constantly. Okay, fine. I just don't use Twitter anymore because Twitter's annoying me and it's not giving me back the effort I put into it. I kept posting constantly all the goddamn time on Instagram and I constantly had to fight with their algorithm to get noticed. Pain in the ass. I don't want to use Instagram anymore, so I stopped using Instagram. It's a pain. I don't want to do it anymore, so I don't. Blue Sky, I can post something on Blue Sky, use like 2 or 3 relevant hashtags, and posts will get so many likes because it's not an algorithmic feed, and people who follow me actually see the stuff that I post. It's fucking incredible, which is why I focus on Blue Sky now. Blue Sky and Tumblr and also kind of sort of YouTube are like the main things I focus on right now because those are the ones that work and those are the ones where people care, and you will notice that those are the ones that don't have algorithmic feeds of information because algorithms are the enemy, gang. Anyway, aside from posting updates, I would also, okay, so here's the thing. I just posted an entire video talking about how to get people on the internet to be interested in your OCs. If you have a webcomic and you have characters in that comic, those are basically your OCs. Those are your little blorbos. The tips in that video will also apply if you have a webcomic and you're trying to get people to read the webcomic. I'm less interested in just like rehashing all of the information in that video right now. So I would say I'll just leave a link to that video when this goes up publicly. It's called How to Get People to Like Your OCs or something along those lines. Watch that video, take some notes. That's all my tips for getting people interested in characters specifically. And the tips in there will also work for advertising webcomics. How far ahead should I script the story and thumbnail the pages before I actually make the pages? So I know it's probably frustrating how many times I've said this, but this is really an individual thing. It's gonna be something that you figure out what your preference is by doing it. Like, this is someone asking, hey, what gear should I use when riding my bike around? Well, it depends on your neighborhood and also on you, and it's not something that you're gonna be able to figure out by just looking up tutorials online and asking people who ride bikes. Part of it is you're just gonna have to sit down and do it, and you're just gonna have to figure out what works for you. I can tell you how it works for me, but that advice might not be applicable to you because you are an entirely different person with an entirely different story and set of circumstances. I'll talk about my methods and what works for me, and you can take that as a baseline, but what works for you is probably going to be different. You'll figure that out by trying and doing and failing and getting back up and experimenting, right? So Cast Off specifically is a story with a lot of mysteries in it and a lot of intrigue. And I like to drop a lot of hints to that mystery well in advance. So I like to script fairly far ahead, just so that I know that I can go back and say, oh, I'm planning on having this thing done in chapter 8. So it would be cool if I went back to the script for chapter 4 and added a hint to it way back here. And then that can be a cool way to foreshadow things. I like to drop in a lot of foreshadowing, so I generally like to, at the very least, outline very far in advance. For me, I've always known the skeleton of Cast-Off's storyline. I have known the bare bones of what happens in the story since before I started the comic. I kind of knew approximately what I wanted to happen. And for the later chapters of the story, that's still what I have. I have a couple of specific scenes. I know approximately what I want to happen, but I don't figure out the nitty-gritty until I actually start scripting. But I like to script pretty far in advance so that I have time and runway to go back and tweak things and edit things. Like, if I did not have a script buffer, chapter 12 would not have been a flashback chapter. I would have had to just like push forward with the original boring version of the story because I'm like, okay, well, I have to start this chapter tomorrow and this is the script I have, so I just have to go. I just have to use this. Meanwhile, if you script far enough ahead, if you change your mind, if you get a better idea and you want to change something and you script far enough ahead that you have the runway to do that, then you can do that. See, what's kind of scary for me right now is that I used to be able to work on scripts during my downtime at my 9-to-5 job. That's how I wrote most of Cast-Off. But now I don't work a desk job, and so I don't have specific writing time. And so my script buffer has dangerously dwindled, and now it's like I've barely even started writing for chapter 14. So now I am forcing myself to have time to actually, you know, sit and work on scripts because I have no script buffer anymore, and it's making me horribly nervous because I really like to be further ahead. It's freaking me out because chapter 14 is going to be a really important chapter. Oh, but anyway, I would say more on having a larger script buffer if you can, and if that is something that is important to your style of writing. But if you're writing like a gag-a-day strip, it's less important, right? And then as far as thumbnails, honestly, with thumbnails, I do thumbnails in batches based on scenes, and I don't thumbnail stuff until I'm ready to actually draw the pages. It's why I never really know how many pages a chapter is going to be until I start drawing it. Sometimes I'll break up the script into approximately where I think the page breaks will go, but sometimes that will change during the thumbnailing phase. If you're trying to stick to a specific page count for your comic chapters, this is not a method that I can recommend, but I make a webcomic and my chapters can be however long I want them to be, so I just kind of do what I want. Whenever I start a new scene, I'll thumbnail all the pages of that scene. I only do that scene. I thumbnail like maybe a scene or two ahead, but generally I do thumbnails as I am drawing them. That's what works for me, but what works for you might be different. The important thing is to experiment and figure it out for yourself. You learn by trying and failing and getting back up and trying again slightly differently until you figure out what works. What's a good way to start making comics? This is, again, going to be something that is very individual. It's going to vary for each person, but I can tell you how I got started making comics, and maybe something in there will spring to your mind and you'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I kind of want to try that. And then you'll try it and you'll see if it works for you. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, you move on and you try something different. I started making comics when I was a wee bab. I started in like middle school. I made my very first comics in like 4th grade, but I didn't start getting serious, quote, serious about it until like 6th grade. And so what I used to do is I was very into 2 series at the time. There were 2 comics that I adored back then that kind of kick-started my love of comics in general. One of them was a 4-panel manga called Azumanga Daioh, and one was Calvin and Hobbes. So my inspiration for comics came from a weird amalgamation of those 2 series. And both of those comics are gag comic strips. And so I thought, oh, especially with Ozymandias. Ozymandias is a slice of life comedy series about girls in high school that just like say and do silly things, and then you get to watch. And so I said, hey, my friends like to say and do silly things. What if I use those things that my friends like to say and do and I make comics out of them? And so what I did was whenever something funny would happen amongst my group of friends, I would take what happened and I would make a little comic about it. And then I would go around and I would show it to all my friends, like for the rest of the day. And I would be like, hey, look at this silly funny thing that happened earlier. You missed it, but I made a comic about it. Here, I can show you. Or you remember this silly thing that you did earlier today? I made a comic about it. Look, that's you. And that was so good for me because getting to show people the comic strips I made, like immediately, people are interested because it's stories about them and people they know. And I get the immediate feedback of, oh, that's fun, it's us, look, this is a silly thing that happened, I love this. And I had people to show immediately. I had a built-in audience of just my little group of friends. And then I had motivation to keep making them because they were giving me positive feedback and like they were really excited to get comics that were about them. All of middle school, basically, I just made so many comics. Just like little comics about dumb shit my friends did. In the grand scheme of things, they didn't mean anything. It was not high art. These were not masterpieces. These were just like weird, dumb little sketches in my sketchbook. But you know what those were? Practice for what was to come. Because I was learning and I wasn't even thinking about it. I was learning how to tell a joke. I was learning how to use the visual medium to its advantages to get the reactions that I wanted. I was learning about paneling. I was learning about composition. I was learning how to show things. And I was learning how to tell a story in this visual medium. But I wasn't focused on that. I was just having fun with it. I was just drawing silly things for my friends. But those dumb little comic scripts were the equivalent of like starting with your little tiny dumbbells and lifting weights. Because then a couple years later, when I decided that I wanted to try making longer form stories and making webcomics and like actually writing longer stories with comics, I already had so much practice with comics as a medium because I spent years and years making these dumb, silly little comics. And that was just like the foundation. That was the building blocks. I was learning the basics by just goofing off and having fun with my friends so that then when I actually wanted to apply those skills to something bigger, I knew how to do that because I'd spent all that time making the silly little comics. I had spent so much time lifting weights that when I actually wanted to do like a sport, like a proper sport, I already had the muscle mass. Does that make sense? If you want to start any creative endeavor that requires a skill, learning the basics in a low stakes way is always going to be easier, one, and two, less likely to scare you off. It's going to be a lot easier to start small than it is to try and jump into something huge. Like, I know that there's a lot of talk back and forth. If you're interested in making a webcomic, should you make that comic or should you do something else first? And this is a contentious topic and a lot of my friends have differing views on it. But what I would suggest, it's like if you want to start knitting, you could try and knit a sweater for your very first knitting project. You're probably not going to finish the sweater. The sweater's probably not going to be very well made. You might have some holes. It might not fit very well. The string tension might be all over the place. It might be a little bit of a mess. And you might get discouraged and you might not finish it. If you're okay with that, then make the sweater. Like, no one's gonna stop you from making the sweater. If you want to pick up a pair of knitting needles for this first time and say, I'm gonna make a sweater, and you're okay with the understanding that you might not finish the sweater. The sweater might be a little wacky. You might go back and wish, man, I wish I had started with something small. You can just make the sweater. There's no knitting police that's gonna come in and say you can't make a sweater as your first project. I'm not gonna be the knitting police. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, hey, it's really great that you wanna make a sweater. That is fantastic. Maybe learn some basic stitches first. Maybe like just make some little like knitted coasters. Make like a scarf. Make something easy that you can just finish. And what that means in comics is gonna be like, maybe your first time making comics, maybe you just make some dumb little comic scripts. Maybe you make just like a little one-shot. Maybe you take the blorbos that you want to use in your webcomic and you just make a couple of like little one-off comics. You make just like a little short story. You make a comic about a character's tragic backstory. You make a comic about how these two characters met. You cut your teeth on the small stuff so that when you're ready to take the step towards actually making the big comic, when you are ready to knit that sweater, you'll have the skills under your belt to know how to do a good job. I'm not going to stop you from making a sweater as your very first thing. God forbid, I never want to stop someone from making a comic. Just be aware that it's pretty common. Your first attempt at a new medium might be a little bit shaky. Your first steps on this earth as a human being were gonna be shaky. No one's good at something their first time doing it. If you think you're going to get discouraged by that, maybe start with something smaller. If you're just super gung-ho and you just want to jump right in feet first into the deep end, I will not stop you. Godspeed, you beautiful nerd. I also find that like doing some of the smaller stuff will help you figure out if you even like making comics. Because I've seen it happen before where someone, you know, goes gung-ho into making comics for like 6 months and then figures out that they don't actually like it that much. They like the idea of making comics, but maybe the actual act of making comics isn't for them. And it's a lot easier and less emotionally tormenting to figure that out on something smaller and lower stakes first, you know? I will never stop you from jumping into the deep end, but maybe learn how to swim first. That's just my advice. That's my take on it. What do you think is the best way to make a webcomic when you have a busy schedule? Question I get a lot. Question I got a lot in the form where I took these questions. So here's the thing. There's always going to be stuff that you have to do that's not comics. Even when you're like me and you make comics for a living, there's always going to be stuff that you have to do that's not comics, and it gets in the way, whether that's a 9 to 5, or if that's a kid, or if that's like social obligations, whatever stuff you have, there's going to be something. Right? And honestly, a little bit of a tough love answer here, but I do think that the best way to still make comics despite a busy schedule is to just try and work the comic into your schedule. Make specific webcomic time, whatever that ends up meaning for you. If that is just like an agreement you come to with your partner that's like, hey, I love you very much, I need Thursdays. Like Thursday evening needs to be my comic time. I would like to keep that day free for working on my comic. Like every Thursday, that's just my comic day. It's like with any regular social obligation, right? It's just figuring out what time you need and how to work that into your schedule. Another thing can be learn how to cut corners and how to save time so that you can more effectively use the time that you have. Learn how to use shortcuts. Maybe your comic doesn't need to be in full color. Maybe you can get away with flat colors. Maybe you can get away with just black and white. Maybe you can get away with like an easier art style. Maybe you can do a lot of stuff to trim down so that you can get pages done in the limited amount of time that you have available. Your comic does not have to be a freaking Monet. Not every page has to be like a masterwork level painting. You can just make a silly little comic. I always tell people, give every single comic page a solid 30 to 50% of your maximum level of effort. Because with comics, people aren't going to be looking at those pages very long. Not every page is a painting. You can do it a little easier, my friend. You can cut down on details. You can make your characters a little bit less designed. You don't have to do crazy rendering for every single page. There's people that do that, and it's impressive. Those people are not people with crazy busy schedules. Also, another thing is that speed comes with practice. So I would say start simple, and as you level up your speed and efficiency, you can start making your pages more detailed if you learn how to work more efficiently. Like my first comic, I didn't do any shading really. I did flat colors for my first comic. I didn't shade it at all, I just did flats. And it saved a lot of time. I went back and shaded it later when the book came out, but my first several chapters of my comic, I didn't shade them at all. They were just flat colors. You do not have to make every page a masterpiece. Figure out what you have time for, and then do what you have time for. Don't try and like force yourself into an unsustainable schedule, because we're all human and we all need time, but you don't have to be spending every single moment of free time on your comic, and honestly, you shouldn't. Our final question for the night. Do you plan out specific shots in your scripts, or do you wait until thumbnailing compositions? So for me personally, I will sometimes have a vision in my head of what a specific panel will look like, or a specific series of like 2 or 3 panels. Or I might imagine like, okay, I definitely want to use this shot when they say this line, but I generally don't thumbnail my pages until I'm ready to draw that page, essentially. Like I said, I do thumbnails in batches based on scene, so I'll thumbnail one scene at a time. If you're the type of person who wants to work that out during the scripting phase, more power to you. I find that I go back and I tweak my scripts so consistently and often that it's easier to just not bother with that extra work until it's time for the comic to be put on the page. I'll put like screen directions into my scripts. Like I'll take notes of what I want specific shots to look like if I have a very clear vision of what I want them to look like. But I find that thumbnailing, I usually just save it for when it's time to actually draw the pages. That's just me though. Yours could change. It depends on how much you are gonna be messing with your scripts, how much you think you're gonna be able to remember. I don't think there's any harm in like maybe doing some very rough sketches of like, I want this panel to look like this. I don't think there's any harm in like jotting that down just so you remember. But me personally, I like to save thumbnails for when it is actively time to draw the pages and scripting as I go. All right, and that's all for this one. I hope you guys learned something. Thank you for sticking around to the very end of this very long video, and let me know what topics you'd like me to potentially explore in future videos and live streams. I've got a few ideas already, but I'd love to hear from y'all as well. And thanks as always to my wonderful channel patrons for helping to keep the channel going. Special thanks to my video shout out to your patrons, Neon Valkyrie, Alyssa Herzog, Leaf, Mr. Donmatsu, and Holly. All right, that's it from me. Fare thee well, friends, and I will see y'all next time. Bye!